Thanks for coming, everybody. It means a lot to me. Celebrate Earth Day along with Shyft Group and our Suzu friends. Jared. Oh, sorry, April, didn't see you. Brief presentation. I do have some honey for sale. I was told to bring some. $10 a bottle, basically. There is one giant one of cinnamon honey. That one's $20. So you'll probably have to fight Nicole for that, but good luck to you on that one. Animal crackers in the back. If you guys want to dunk a cracker and a little bit of honey, get a taste test. There's vanilla and there's regular. So you can have a little taste, see what hopefully you're going to be buying. But all right, let's go. So Apis mellifera, that's the Latin name for the western honeybee. So most people do not know that this particular honeybee is not native to North America. So this was brought over from Europe, and then they started to colonize them throughout the U.S. And create the honey sales. So the pollination before Apis mellifera came to the United States was wild honeybees, wasps, bumblebees, hornets, any of those flying things that we normally smack. That's what pollinated everything throughout the continent. Now that the honeybee has moved in and we've discovered the valuable resource that it provides as far as pollination, now it's just ridiculously everywhere, and farmers are using it for agricultural purposes to pollinate their crops, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So a little bit about Charlotte Honey Company. Just on the north end of Charlotte, specialize in all things honeybee. I do build all the wooden hive components, as you can see right here. Honey, wax, I do some mentoring. I'm part of the Hives for Heroes program. So we mentor vets to help prevent suicide in veterans. So that's a really cool program. I just met this year's mentee 2 weeks ago. He came over and we did some hive inspections at my house, and we had a pretty good time doing that. I do swarm collection. So if you guys swarm of bees somewhere out in the neighborhood, give me a shout. I'll come over, collect them up, take them back to my house. As you can see, the little blue dot there, that's my house. And if you look, I'm on the headwaters of the Thornapple River. So this is all river bottom, and you can see the amount of woods. So there's over 2 square miles of woods. And so if you'll notice on my honey bottles, it's titled Woodland Blend. So my bees get almost all of their nectar from the woods. If I stand and look at my hives, I can see the bees shoot across my yard and head right for the woods. So tons of trees that flower, like the red maples, the first thing that you see the buds on in early spring a couple weeks ago. They have a little bit of nectar and a lot of pollen. So that's the real first food source for the honeybees when it's still fairly cold. So again, wooden hive components, honey sales. Everyone knows honeybees make honey, but their contributions hardly end there. 1/3 of the U.S. diet is derived from insect pollinated plants. So 1 out of every 3 bites you take is because of a honeybee. Honeybees are responsible for an impressive 80% of that process. Bees are critical to the health of our planet and our own food chain. Your food: apples, oranges, melons, grapefruit, blueberries, canola, which is an oil. It's what we get a lot of vegetable oil, canola oil, soy oil, and almonds. Almonds are the big ones that you probably see on the news where the semis are going down the freeway and they've got 500-600 hives piled on them and they crash and there's honeybees all over the freeway. Those are generally headed to California for the almond pollination. Over 2 million hives are moved around the country annually to support that pollination program. If you look, and I was fortunate enough to live in California. I lived in a little town called Chico. We were up about 3,000 feet elevation in the mountains is where my house was. And as I drove down the mountain into the valley to go to work every day, it was nothing but miles and miles of almond orchards. Nothing else, just almond orchards. The almond ranchers, farmers, whatever you want to call them, they get rid of everything else. So it's bare ground and just rows of trees. So there are no natural pollinators around because there's nothing else to eat when the almonds are done flowering. So they bring in honeybees, and people from all over the U.S. will ship their honeybees to California, and they set stacks of honeybee hives out in the orchards. And the bees fly out, they pollinate all the almonds, and then there's nothing left to eat. So they come back to the boxes, and the farmers pick them up, and they'll take them north to Oregon and Washington, where they'll start pollinating apples and blueberries and things like that. So without these little fellas, we wouldn't have a lot of apples, oranges, things like that. So Pollination services add over $15 billion. That's billion with a B to the U.S. economy. And some say that's over 200 billion ecological services. So what the little creature does to benefit the wildlife and the wildlands, the streams, the meadows, all that, they somehow were able to put a dollar figure on that. So then they maintain soil health and they help keep water clean as well. So if you want to be a hobby beekeeper, like the average startup cost to start a colony with your hive boxes, your frames, and purchasing the bees averages right around $500 per colony. So when you see the prices for honey and you wonder why, it's kind of expensive, well, it costs $500 for that box of bees right there. So, and they're not guaranteed to live through the winter if you don't take care of them correctly. Predators are adversaries of the honeybee. Biggest one is pesticides. So the farmers are spraying tons of chemicals all over the fields. A lot of that will drift, or the bees will actually fly through the field and make contact with it, and they'll take that back to the hive, and they're going to spread it around the hive just by crawling around, and that can really be detrimental to the honeybees. Habitat loss is the big one. The almond orchards that I was talking about, where they wipe everything out, the fence rows, the brush, the wildflowers, all these subdivisions that are going in, they're wiping out so much bee habitat. So that's like one of the big adversaries of the honeybee. Climate change, of course. Many of you are at least as old as I am. Remember back in the day when winters were winter and it just stayed cold all winter long. Well, what do we get now in Michigan for our winter? It's like this. So bees fill up their hive full of honey. That's what they eat all winter. They don't hibernate. They sit in a cluster and they'll slowly move up that hive and they'll eat the honey as they're going up. Well, when it's warm-ish in the winter, we get 45, 50 degrees, the bees are more active. So they're eating more honey. And so then it'll get cold and then they'll slow down. Then it'll get warm and they'll eat more honey. So like you have to pack 100 to 150 pounds of honey in each hive just so the bees have something to eat over the winter. And so that really screws up the bees with the up and down. They'll go out and fly and then we'll get cold. They're not going to get back to the hive in time, or they're not able to get a tight enough cluster inside the hive, and they'll freeze to death. So that's a big one. Parasites. So if you see in the picture, you see the little red dot on the thorax of that honeybee. That's a mite. They feed off the fat bodies inside the bee, sort of kind of like a mosquito, kind of like a tick. Well, that doesn't inadvertently kill the bee. It's the viruses that the mite passes to the bee through its proboscis. The bees, or the viruses, get into the bees and they wreak havoc. So one of the big ones is DFV, so deformed wing virus. And what that does is when the honeybee comes out of its pupa state, its wings are all shriveled up and they're all discombobulated. It can't fly. A honeybee that can't fly is worthless to the colony. Well, it'll spread throughout the whole colony if you don't keep your mites in track. So we treat for those. Some people choose no treatments, and they have had success. Scientists are trying to breed mite-resistant queens. So essentially the bees are slightly more aggressive in the hive, and they will clean the mites off of each other and chew them up. They haven't been 100% successful with that right now. So myself, I do mite treatments. I use oxalic acid, which is a naturally occurring chemical. It's actually found in honey, and that comes in crystallized form, and I put that in a little vaporizer and I shoot it into the hive, and that paralyzes the mites. They fall off. Another thing I use is formic acid, which is another natural chemical that comes in a pad. I put that on in the fall, and what that will do is actually kill any mites that are in the cells. So mites reproduce in the cell with the baby bee, and the bees will cap that cell over with a little bit of wax, and it allows that baby bee to pupate into a full-grown bee. Well, once it's capped, the mites slip in there just before they finish capping it, and then they have 10 to 14 days to feed off this baby bee that's pupating. Well, the formic acid will actually penetrate that cap and get down in there and kill that mite, where the oxalic acid won't. So you have to use a combination of treatments to get rid of those pests. And then disease. Dysentery is actually a big one. So if your bees aren't healthy going into winter, they'll end up defecating inside the hive, which bees will not defecate inside the hive. A healthy bee colony will hold it all winter long, or until the temperature is warm enough for them to fly out, take a dump, and come back. Dysentery is a big one. There's some other ones, but we could go on and on about that. So the life cycle of a bee. So the queen lays an egg in an open cell, and that egg is only an egg for 3 days. The egg is standing straight up in the bottom of the cell. On day 2, the egg is leaned to the side. On day 3, the egg is laying down. When the egg lays down, the nurse bees will come in and they're going to put a little bit of what's called royal jelly. It's a weird name, but that's what the nurse bees make. They spit it into that cell, and then that 3-day-old egg on day 4 hatches into a larva. And that larva consumes that royal jelly, and that's what feeds it. And the nurse bees will constantly just give that bee or that larva just enough royal jelly so it develops into a worker bee or a drone, which is a male bee, because 99% of the bees in a colony are female. They have drones, so obviously they can mate and reproduce. But after about 7 days, the larva will turn into a pupa. And as you can see the top line, the yellow, turns into a pupa. That's when they'll cap that cell over. And now they no longer have to take care of that baby bee. So it's on its own until day 23, 24, and then it'll hatch out and either become a drone or a worker. I don't know if you can read that. A drone takes 24 days from egg to emergence, and a worker female bee takes 21 days.
Am I seeing no wings on that worker? Or is there wings on
They're there. They're just laying over top of her abdomen. But yeah, it does look like that. So the queen, she's the fast one. Queens are made by the bees themselves. So if a queen is failing, average queen will lay good for about 2 years. And then she starts to run out of sperm and she can't fertilize eggs anymore. I'll get to why she has sperm in a second. And so the hive will notice that, and they'll be like, okay, this chick ain't doing very good, so we got to get her out of here. So they will take an egg and they will feed it extra royal jelly, and they will build the cell out a little bit bigger, and the extra royal jelly actually turns that worker bee into a queen bee. That's all it takes, is a little bit of extra food. So they'll make themselves a new queen, and then when that queen hatches, she'll go find the other queen and kill her. And then you have a brand new fresh queen. But that process only takes 16 days. So make a bigger bee in less time. Go figure. Mother Nature's a miracle. So and that's pretty much the life cycle from egg to hatch. Now, once the bees hatch and come out of the cell, the average lifespan for a worker is 30 to 35 days. And that's it. They live a month and then they die. The queen, a good queen, will lay 2,000 eggs a day. 2,000 eggs is about this lower frame here, from here down. That's about how many cells are in that frame. It's about roughly 2,000. So she'll fill that side of the frame every day. That's great. So you're like, well, there's tons of bees now. Well, 2,000 more just died. So she'll lay again. The next day, 2,000 more bees day. You know, it's just a constant cycle. In the spring, when the nectar flows really heavy, which is in about 2 weeks from now, she's going to go into overdrive, and she can lay 2,500 to 3,000 eggs a day. So she's going to boost the population in the hive as much as she can, because we need to get that nectar in. We need to fill those boxes full of nectar and turn it into honey so that they have enough stores to survive the winter. So this time of year, the bees go crazy, and you'll end up with overflowing hives, and they'll end up swarming, which we'll get to in just a second. So what happens inside the hive? So the queen, her only job is to lay eggs. That's all she does. She doesn't even feed herself. The worker bees feed her. They clean her. She just lays eggs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The workers are all female, and they have duties depending on their age. So when they first come out of the cell, they're called housekeeping bees. So all they're doing is cleaning the cells, taking litter outside of the hive and getting rid of it. Week 2, they become nurse bees. So they're feeding the larval royal jelly and tending to all the baby bees that are just from egg to before they get capped over as a pupa. Week 3, they become guards. So they stand at the front entrance and they just keep all the critters and pests and try to keep the beekeepers out of the hive. Week 4 is when they finally leave the hive and they head for, in my case, the woods to get nectar out of the flowers. And they'll spend a week doing that. And that's pretty much what kills them off, because they fly nonstop all day long. They'll fly out. They can fly up to 3 miles to get nectar. And then they'll come right back to the hive. So after roughly week 4 of being emerged from the cell, they're gone. And the cool thing about honeybees is they don't die in the hive. They know when it's their time, they'll fly off and they'll die away from the hive, so they're not attracting pests and stuff that want to eat all the dead bees. Drones are the male bees. Drones are slightly larger, bigger around than the worker female bees. They do not have a stinger, which is fun because I always like to put them in my kid's hand and she can play with them because they won't sting her. Drones also don't feed themselves. They're useless. They're slackers. They just wander around the hive. They get fed. However, when a virgin queen emerges from that queen cell we talked about earlier, she's got to fly out of the hive and get mated. She's not going to mate with her brothers and sisters. Here's the weird thing. So the drones, they'll come out of all the neighboring hives for miles and miles. And for some unknown reason, they will fly to certain areas. They're called drone congregation areas. This is one thing that scientists have not figured out yet. And there'll be a mass of drones flying around. The queens pick up the pheromone. They head to that spot too. So there's a giant bee orgy in the sky. It's queens from all over, drones from all over, and they're mating. So the queen will mate with up to 15 drones in the air as they're flying, and they'll mate. So the queen has a spermatheca, so it's a giant sac, I guess you call it. I mean, that's fitting. Inside her body that holds a lifetime of sperm from those drones. So she's banging a lot of drones to fill that thing up. Once she's full, she'll return to the hive, and then she doesn't leave. She's set there for life unless she swarms. You generally can't see the orgy because it's way up in the air. They're not landing anywhere. They're actually mating as they're flying. No, you're not going to see a drone queen swarm. No, I mean, you're talking 500-600 bees, where a swarm that you see on the news or on Facebook or whatever, that's 6,000 bees. And it makes a giant ball, and people are trying to kill it because they're afraid of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Randomly flying in the air.
So, and then once the males are done mating with the queen, their penis actually rips out of their body and sticks to the queen, and they die. So, honey nut Cheerio. So the resources inside the hive, obviously, we have wax, honey, and then propolis, which is basically caulk for bees. They use it to seal up all the edges, keep all the drafts down. Swarming. So this is another way, well, actually it's technically the only way that honeybees reproduce. So yes, the queens do mate with the drones, but then they come back here, and that's it. That's where they spend their life. So they're not actively out mating and reproducing hives everywhere by the actual mating process. So the swarm is when the hive gets overloaded and there's no more room for the queen to lay, the bees are packed in there, they can't fit any more nectar in there, they're basically stuck. They'll send out a pheromone and they'll start that queen process. They'll lay an egg, start feeding the extra royal jelly, start turning that into a queen cell. So the queen now is going to take half of the bees and she's going to leave, but right now she's too fat. She's huge. She can't fly. She hasn't flown since her mating flight. So that worker bees actually chase her around the hive. They'll stop feeding her and they just nonstop chase her around. They don't let her stop. She loses weight. She's able to fly. And when that queen cell, when they cap it over, that's the signal for the rest of the bees to get the hell out of there. So they will literally take half the bees and the queen, and they will leave, and they'll end up in a pile on a branch somewhere like that. So we want to prevent that as beekeepers because we're losing half of our money, essentially. And once a hive swarms, you start all over with that whole building process, and then you're going to lose out on all your honey production as well.
So if you gather that swarm, put it in stuff like this, and then they'll go ahead and make a new queen.
If you get that swarm and you get the queen with it, and you put it in a box, you've got a brand new hive. So what we do, and what I actually did last night, was I split the hive. So I take the box, and then step in front of here. I'll do this real quick because we're going to run out of time. So inside the hive, and these are all empty frames, but we've got all these frames, right? I got wired frames, I got wax or plastic foundation. I will take 4 of the frames out of this hive with the queen and make sure they've got a bunch of baby bees and stuff in there as well. I'll take these 4 frames, move it into a brand new hive. I'll push these frames back together so they have eggs and larvae, cap brood, pollen, nectar, all the stuff that they need to survive. They're going to know within an hour that they're queenless, and they're going to start that queen building process. And so now this hive is going to build their own queen right inside the box. I've taken the old queen and put her in a new box, so now I've got 2 hives out of 1. And if you catch it at the right time and you give them the correct amount of resources, you're not going to lose that much time on this hive for honey production. So a full-size hive that doesn't swarm, I can get 100 pounds of honey out of it. One that I split, I'm going to get 50 to 60 pounds of honey. So there is a slight bit of loss. And then while I'm in here, I'll show you. This is a drawn-out frame. So they build all the wax into the cells. I cut the cappings off of it, and then I put it in my spinner, spin it around, and the honey flies out of there. So I do hundreds of these every year to fill up these little bottles. So I'll leave that out in case anybody wants to look at it. Yeah, this is what I like to use in the supers, and we call the box on top of this. So this is a deep box. It's 9 5/8 inches tall. The super is 6 5/8, and that fits these size frames. If you fill this box full of honey, it's 90 pounds. Really hard to carry when you got 30 of them to carry back and forth to your honey house. So I use the shorter ones. They're called supers with the short frames. So, and also they can fill these frames up full of nectar, turn it into honey, and cap it over a lot faster than they can the big ones. So the brood box is the deep one. That's where they make the nest and the babies, and you try to keep all that business down here, all the sales up here. So I just kind of went through this swarm prevention. You can take packed comb out. If it's full of nectar or full of eggs, you can move some of those eggs and brood over to a different hive and give fresh wax, drawn out comb to that hive. So then they have more room. So they just want more room. As long as they recognize that they can keep doing what they're made to do, they won't swarm. We can split them, and then you can just keep adding boxes too. As long as the queen's got a little bit of room to lay eggs, you can keep adding boxes on top, and they'll keep pumping all the nectar into those boxes. But if you don't, they're going to add all that nectar down to the bottom where she's supposed to lay eggs, and then she's going to run out of room, and that triggers the swarm response. So some really cool things about honeybees. They have a built-in GPS. And one of my favorite times of the day is when I go out to the hives, and it usually happens between 2 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Those week 4 bees that are coming out of the hive for the first time, they've never seen the outside world. Mind you, honeybees can fly up to 3 miles to gather nectar. How do they get back? So when they come out of the hive, they do what's called orientation flights. They'll come out and they'll do a little circle in the air, and they'll go right back to the hive. The next one, they come out and the circle gets a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. Well, every day, 2,000 to 3,000 bees are fresh to this cycle. So you've got 2,000 to 3,000 bees coming out of the hive doing their orientation flights. I have 8 hives in my backyard, so you can imagine what 24,000 bees doing circles in the air looks like. And I love to just stand right in the middle of it, and there's just bees flying everywhere, and the sound, it's crazy. It's really fun. So they'll just keep doing circles. They orient to trees, shrubs, colors of the hives, and they'll fly 3 miles away, and they will come back to a spot that big every single time. If I take the hive and I move it over 3 feet, they are all coming back to this spot, even though their hive is right here. You'll just have this huge pile of bees right here going, what the hell? Where'd my house go? You put it back, and they'll go right to it. Yeah. So waggle dance. This one's super cool. Worker bees fly out. They find a really good nectar source. They come back to the hive, so they're going to communicate to the other bees where to go find this. So the waggle dance is a bee will come in, and they'll start marching around in a circle, and the tilt of their body will tell them the azimuth in relation to the sun, so what angle to fly, and then they waggle their butt, and that tells them the distance. And so with this combination of circles and waggles, the other bees can fly right to that nectar source. And I see it all the time. Like you open the hive up, and there's just waggle dances going everywhere. And yeah, and they just chew. So bees are really advantageous. They don't want, your rose garden in your backyard. They want giant trees just loaded with flowers. So they go for the big sources of nectar. Interhive communication, so that's done, via the waggle dance, and then pheromones. Each bee has a pheromone. The queen, number 1, has the biggest pheromone that she passes off to the other bees, and they do that mainly by touch. So when you take a queen out of there, she's not able to spread her pheromone around the hive, and then they're going to know that it's gone. So And there's a lot of other pheromones they communicate with. Asked my brother last night. He got stung. He got a little too close while I was working the hives. And they put out an alarm pheromone. So he got stung right inside the ear. And he's standing there. He's like, damn, that hurt. I said, well, you might want to back up a little bit. He's like, no, I'm fine. I'm like, no, there's an alarm pheromone in the air. They're going to come sting you in the ear again. And he's like, ow. I said, God, ow. And I'm like, you better go. Like, because, yeah, I have a suit and everything on. Like, I'm not dumb like he is. But yeah, he got stung like 7 times before he finally took off for the house. I'm like, I told you that unless you rub honey on the sting site or you smoke it with your smoker to mask that pheromone, they're all coming after you. They're telling their sisters like, hey, we have a problem. Come help fight this. So we cover the wax and the honey and the propolis a little bit. So anybody got the time?
12:32.
Oh, shit. Everyone's like, we're not leaving. Spring is when the honeybees fly out, and they're going to start collecting nectar, and they're going to pack everything full. Summer, the nectar flow kind of dies down a little bit. All your big flowers are gone. Your fruit flowers, your dandelions, all of that stuff starts to die. So you get into what's called a dearth. And the honeybees they'll hang out. There's a few that go out and get whatever they can find. During the summer, a lot of times they're bringing in water, and they'll deposit the water in the hive, and then they'll fan their wings across it, which cools the hive down a little bit so they maintain the temperature. Normally they do it just by fanning at the entrance, pulling in fresh air and cycling it through the hive is how they regulate the temperatures. The queen's egg laying will slow down a little bit. She doesn't want to raise any babies because the big nectar flows are done with. No sense having mouths to feed when they're not doing anything. Kind of like Joe when he was younger. So fall is truly when the beekeeper season starts. So we have fall nectar flows. Goldenrod is the big one. And as many people as I've argued with about goldenrod pollen and how it doesn't create allergies. Goldenrod pollen is heavy. It's not airborne. It falls to the ground. But the bees love the goldenrod, and it's also full of nectar. I rely on the goldenrod flow in the fall to pack the hives full with honey because I've already stolen all their spring honey. So they'll use the goldenrod and the asters to fill their hives back up in the fall to try to get to that 80 to 100 pound mark of capped honey going into the winter. Fall is also when we're going to treat heavily for the mites. And then bees of winter physiology are made in late summer and fall. That's a new term. You haven't heard that. Bees create winter bees that can live all winter. So we just talked about how bees only live 30 days, right? The queen slows her laying down to almost nothing in the winter. They're clustered up in a ball, staying warm. There's nothing going on. So how are those bees going to live more than 30 days? Well, the new winter bees are created with more fat cells in their body, which allows them to live for 3 to 4 months for the whole winter period. So in order to get healthy bees of winter physiology, we have to make sure they're fed correctly in the fall. We have to make sure they're not loaded down with mites and diseases so that they can actually live through the winter. So that's when the beekeeper season starts, because if you don't have healthy bees going into winter, you're going to have dead bees in the spring. So last winter, I went into winter with 8 hives. I came out of winter with 8 hives. So I had 100% success rate over the winter, which is pretty rare. Last year I lost 1 hive. So making sure your bees are healthy and taking care of them is paramount to sustaining, a healthy apiary. So winter's pretty boring for a beekeeper. The work doesn't stop. I spend, the winter in the shop building hives and frames and doing all that stuff, bottling honey and what have you. But the bees don't hibernate. So they will actually get to the center of the hive and they will make a tight cluster, generally a large football size shape. And to stay warm, they vibrate the muscles that controls their wings. That creates heat. So the center of the cluster is 85 degrees roughly in the middle of winter. It could be 10 degrees outside. The center of that cluster is about 85 degrees, and it slowly gets cooler on the outside. The outside of the cluster can be 55 to 60 degrees. Bees don't really like that, so what they do is they rotate. So the outside bees will move to the inside, and the inside bees will move to the outside. And they just do that all winter long, and they slowly move up the hive, consuming the honey. They move about 5 millimeters a day. So by the end of winter, they're all the way at the top of the box and they've eaten all the resources, but that's how bees survive in the winter. Moisture is a big thing. So all that heat is going to rise. The bees are really good about containing that heat in that cluster. So it's not like a furnace. It doesn't heat the whole box. It only heats the cluster. There's a little bit of residual warmth from the outside of it. That raises up, hits the cold surface of the hive top and condensates. The condensate drips down onto the bees. It's going to kill them. Bees can be cold. They just can't be cold and wet. That would kill all of us as well. So what I like to do is I make a giant sugar brick, like 8 by 10, about 1 inch deep. I just sugar and water, put it in the oven, bake it till it's hard. I'll set it right on top of the frames, and then that warm air will come up and hit that sugar brick, and it'll suck into the sugar brick, and it won't allow the condensate to fall down on top of the bees. And if they run out of honey, they'll actually go up and eat that sugar brick. So that's how I get the bees through the winter. Thank you. Any questions?
I have a question. Earlier I asked you how long they would live in there if you just left the bees in that display case, and you said a few days probably.
Yep, until they eat all the food that's in there.
So we're going to take food out of the equation for the question, with the queen being in there and laying 2,000 a day, does that mean 3 days from now, if they were all still alive, there'd be 6,000 extra bees in there?
If there's enough space in that frame for them to lay eggs, which the top frame is full of nectar and pollen, and half the bottom frame is full of nectar, which is why I chose those, so she wouldn't go into an egg-laying frenzy and, they'd be all discombobulated and not be able to take care of the babies properly because I'm moving them, hot, cold. So, but yeah, if I had fresh frame, she would lay that thing full of eggs, and 3 days later, they would turn into a larva, and I'd have to have the resources in the hive. Like, it takes a lot of nectar and pollen to feed all those babies. So, and then once they run out of food, they'll actually cannibalize their own babies. So they need protein too. And they obviously know that they can't take care of them. Either that or, they'll carry them out of the hive and just throw them away. So.
How often you gotta take stuff, like, take stuff out of your hive to keep enough room for?
I don't take things out generally. I'll split the hives and give them more room that way. But yeah, sometimes, if I have a weaker colony, I can take a frame of brood out of this one and give it to this one, and then they'll automatically get an extra 3,000 bees to boost their numbers.
And the hives are fine with that? You take something out of one
Oh, yeah.
hive, they're fine?
Yep.
No problem?
I want to make sure that Jeff gets a really big round of applause.
He did so good.
Thank you. Don't forget to get a taste of honey on your way out, or a bottle.
These hives, you see this bow down, do they really work?
They can, yeah. It's sort of a 50-50 thing. Either the bees will take to it or they'll just ignore it completely. So, but the ones they take to, I've seen videos where they just hit the spout and honey comes right out. Yeah. Yep.
That's interesting, Jeff.
It's fun.
I learned something today.
So like your vanilla flavor honey, is that actually the honey that vanilla or?
No, I infuse it with vanilla bean. So.
Feed the bees vanilla coffee, and they make vanilla honey.
Good job.